There is a moment that comes to us all, a moment of recognition so profound, so unsettling, that it fractures the comfortable illusion we've built around ourselves. You're standing in yet another relationship, another friendship, another situation where you feel unseen, unheard, perhaps even unloved. And suddenly, like lightning illuminating a darkened landscape, you realize you've been here before. Not just once, not twice, but again and again and again. Different faces, different names, different cities, different years, different versions of yourself, but the same pattern, the same pain, the same desperate reaching towards someone who cannot or will not give you what you need. And in that moment of shattering recognition, a question forms in your mind like a wound opening. Why? Why do I keep choosing this? Why does this feel so inevitable, so magnetic, so right, even as it destroys me? Tonight, we descend into one of the deepest mysteries of human consciousness, the strange, terrible, beautiful paradox of why we are drawn, again and again, to the people who hurt us, why we mistake pain for passion, why we confuse unavailability with desire, why we build homes in the hearts of those who can only ever offer us ruins. This is not a story about weakness. This is not a lecture about poor choices or damaged goods. This is something far more profound, far more ancient. This is a journey into the shadow, that vast, unexplored territory of the unconscious mind, where our deepest wounds become our most powerful compasses, where childhood becomes destiny, and where the past doesn't simply haunt us, but actively architects our future. The question, why am I drawn to the people who hurt me, is not merely psychological, it is mythological. It is the question of Persephone descending into the underworld, knowing she shouldn't eat the pomegranate seeds, but unable to resist their terrible sweetness. It is the question of Orpheus turning back to look at Eurydice, even though he knows the glance will destroy everything. It is the question every human being asks when they find themselves, once again, dancing with their demons and calling it love. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Tonight, we make the unconscious conscious. Tonight, we illuminate the hidden machinery of attraction, the secret algorithms of the heart that were written in childhood and play out endlessly in the theater of adult relationships. Tonight, we understand why the people who hurt us feel like home. Because they do feel like home, don't they? That's the terrifying truth. The person who criticizes you the way your father did, the partner who withholds affection like your mother, the friend who abandons you at the crucial moment, just like your sibling did. They don't feel foreign, they feel familiar. And the human psyche, in its desperate attempt to master what it could not control in childhood, will always choose the familiar over the unknown. We are about to explore the architecture of this compulsion. We will trace its origins back through evolutionary biology, attachment theory, neuroscience, and depth psychology. We will descend into the unconscious and meet the ghost children we once were, the wounded, neglected, abandoned, criticized versions of ourselves who still live in the basement of our psyche, still crying out for the love they never received, still hoping that this time, if we just try hard enough, we can finally make the unavailable parent become available, the critical voice become approving, the abandoning figure finally stay. But here is what you must understand from the beginning. This pattern, this repetition compulsion, this magnetic pull toward familiar pain, it is not your fault. It is not a moral failing. It is not evidence that you are broken or unlovable or destined for misery. It is, in fact, evidence of something extraordinary, your psyche's relentless drive toward healing, toward completion, toward resolution. You are not drawn to people who hurt you because you are masochistic. You are drawn to them because your unconscious mind is trying to solve an ancient equation, to finish an incomplete narrative, to finally master a trauma that once overwhelmed you. It is misguided, yes. It is often destructive, yes. But it is also, in its own twisted way, an act of hope, a belief that this time, with this person, you can finally rewrite the ending. The tragedy is that we cannot heal the past by repeating it. We can only heal it by making it conscious, by understanding it, by choosing differently. And that is the journey we are about to take together. So settle in, breathe deeply. What you are about to hear may disturb you, may challenge you, may force you to confront truths you've spent a lifetime avoiding. But on the other side of this descent into shadow lies something precious: freedom. The freedom to choose consciously rather than compulsively. The freedom to love from wholeness rather than from wound. The freedom to recognize the pattern, to honor what it tried to teach you, and finally, to break it. This is the story of how we become trapped in the past, and how we escape. Let us begin where all great journeys begin. At the beginning, in the territory of childhood, where the maps of love are first drawn in invisible ink upon the psyche of an innocent, where attachment is forged in the fires of need, and where the template for every future relationship is carved into the developing brain with the force of a sculptor's chisel. Let us begin with the question: what is love supposed to feel like? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself as an infant, utterly helpless, completely dependent, a consciousness newly arrived in a strange and overwhelming world. You have needs, warmth, food, safety, touch. But you have no way to meet them yourself. Your survival depends entirely on the responsiveness of your caregiver. In those first months and years of life, your brain is not merely learning facts about the world. It is learning something far more fundamental. It is learning whether the world is safe or dangerous, whether needs will be met or ignored, whether you are worthy of love or fundamentally alone. It is learning the emotional syntax that will structure every relationship for the rest of your life. This is the domain of attachment theory, first mapped by the British psychiatrist John Bowlby in the 1950s, and later expanded by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth. What they discovered revolutionized our understanding of human relationships. The quality of your early attachment to your primary caregivers creates an internal working model, a blueprint, a schema, a template for how relationships function. This template becomes the lens through which you perceive all future intimacy. Think of it as a language. Your first relationship teaches you the language of love. And just as you learn your mother tongue without conscious effort, you learn the grammar of attachment without awareness. If your caregiver was consistently responsive, attuned, emotionally available, if your cries were answered, your needs were met, your emotions were validated, you learned that love means safety. You learned that when you are vulnerable, support arrives. You learned that you are worthy of care. This is secure attachment, and it becomes your baseline expectation for all relationships. But what if your early experience was different? What if your caregiver was inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, unpredictable in their availability? Then you learned that love is uncertain. You learned that you must remain hypervigilant, always monitoring the emotional temperature, always anxious about whether the connection will hold or break. This is anxious attachment, and it teaches you that relationships are sources of both desperate need and constant worry. What if your caregiver was emotionally distant, dismissive, uncomfortable with your vulnerability? Then you learned that emotions are dangerous, that needs are burdensome, that the safest strategy is to minimize your dependence on others. This is avoidant attachment, and it teaches you that closeness equals threat, that self-sufficiency is survival. And what if, and this is where the story darkens, what if your caregiver was not merely inconsistent or distant, but actively frightening? What if the person who was supposed to protect you was also the source of your fear? What if love came tangled with pain, nurture with neglect, care with criticism, intimacy with invasion? This is where the foundation is laid for what we are exploring tonight. This is where the terrible equation is written into your nervous system. Love equals pain, safety equals danger, home equals hurt. The psychologist Mary Main called this disorganized attachment, a state of profound confusion where the infant cannot develop a coherent strategy for seeking comfort because the source of comfort is also the source of terror. The child approaches the caregiver, then freezes, reaches out, then collapses. The nervous system receives contradictory messages simultaneously. I need you, and I fear you. Come closer, and get away. And because the developing brain cannot resolve this paradox, it does something remarkable and heartbreaking. It internalizes the contradiction. It makes the chaos normal. It learns that this is what love feels like. Let me tell you about a child. We'll call her Maya. Maya was 3 years old when the pattern began. Her father was brilliant, charismatic, larger than life, and profoundly unstable. Some days he would sweep her up in his arms, call her his princess, tell her she was the most special girl in the world. Those were the good days, the days when she felt seen, chosen, cherished beyond measure. But other days, and she never knew which days they would be. He would look at her with cold eyes and tell her she was disappointing him, that she wasn't trying hard enough, that she needed to be better, smarter, more worthy of his attention. Maya's nervous system learned something on those days. It learned that love is conditional, that worthiness must be earned, that the feeling of being special is always provisional, always one mistake away from being revoked. More importantly, it learned that the moments of warmth and praise, precisely because they were unpredictable, were intensely, addictively valuable. Like a gambler at a slot machine, the intermittent reinforcement made his approval more powerful than if it had been consistent. Decades later, Maya found herself in a relationship with a man who was emotionally unavailable, critical, occasionally warm, but mostly distant. Her friends couldn't understand it. He treats you terribly, they'd say. Why do you stay? But Maya felt something they couldn't see. When he was kind to her, even briefly, she felt that old childhood rush, that feeling of being special, chosen, worthy. And when he withdrew, she felt the desperate need to win back his approval, to prove her worthiness, to finally make him see her the way she needed to be seen. She wasn't choosing this man in spite of the pain. She was choosing him because of the familiarity of the pain. Her nervous system had been trained, like Pavlov's dogs, to associate love with this particular mixture of hunger and hurt. Stable, consistent kindness felt alien to her. It didn't register as love because it didn't match the template. It felt boring, unexciting, lacking the intensity she had come to believe was synonymous with passion. This is the mechanism. This is how the past colonizes the present. This is why you might find yourself drawn to the emotionally unavailable person at a party full of warm, available people. Why you might feel anxious when someone is too nice, too consistent, too present. Why you might unconsciously sabotage relationships that are going well. Why you might mistake emotional turbulence for depth, distance for mystery, inconsistency for excitement. Your unconscious mind is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to take you home. And home, for many of us, was not a place of peace. It was a place of survival, of adaptation, of learning to live with less than we needed. So when we encounter that same atmosphere in adult relationships, something in us says, yes, this. I know how to navigate this. This is familiar territory. The repetition compulsion, as Freud called it, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It is the drive to repeat, to return, to reenact the original trauma in the unconscious, hope that this time the outcome will be different. It is why the daughter of an alcoholic father dates alcoholic men, why the son of a critical mother seeks out critical partners, why those who were abandoned fear and unconsciously engineer abandonment, why those who were neglected feel uncomfortable with abundance. But there is more to this story. The attachment pattern is only the beginning. To truly understand why we are drawn to people who hurt us, we must go deeper still. We must enter the realm of the shadow. Carl Jung, that great explorer of the unconscious, understood something profound about human nature. We are not one self. We are many selves, and most of them are hidden even from ourselves. Jung called the totality of these hidden selves the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we have rejected, repressed, denied, hidden away in the basement of consciousness because they were too painful, too shameful, too dangerous to acknowledge. The shadow contains our rage, our neediness, our shame, our vulnerability, our wild desires, our unacceptable thoughts. But it also contains something else, something crucial. It contains the parts of ourselves we were told were not lovable. Listen carefully. If in childhood you expressed a need and were told you were too needy, if you showed anger and were told you were too much, if you displayed vulnerability and were shamed, if you reached for connection and were rejected, then you learned that certain parts of yourself are unacceptable, and so you buried them. You pushed them into the shadow. You created what Jung called a persona, a socially acceptable mask, and tried to be only the parts that seemed to earn love. But here is the terrible paradox. The shadow does not disappear. The parts you reject do not cease to exist. They go underground, into the unconscious, where they continue to live, to pulse with energy, to demand recognition. And one of the primary ways they make themselves known is through projection, seeing in others what we cannot see in ourselves. This is where the mechanism becomes truly profound. You are not just drawn to people who hurt you because they recreate childhood patterns. You are drawn to them because they carry the shadow parts you've rejected in yourself. The critical partner reflects the inner critic you've internalized. The distant lover mirrors your own fear of intimacy. The unavailable person embodies your own unavailability to yourself. The people who hurt us are not random. They are mirrors. Dark mirrors, yes. Painful mirrors. But mirrors nonetheless. They show us what we cannot yet see in ourselves. They activate the wounds we have not yet healed. They call forth the parts of ourselves we have not yet integrated. And on some deep, unconscious level, we recognize this. We sense that these people hold keys to our own depths. We believe, often without knowing it, that if we can just make them love us, we will somehow prove that we are lovable, not just to them, but to ourselves. If we can just transform their coldness into warmth, we will heal the coldness we feel toward ourselves. If we can just earn their approval, we will finally approve of ourselves. This is the mythic dimension of the pattern. This is why toxic relationships can feel so compelling, so significant, so laden with meaning. They are not just relationships. They are unconscious attempts at self-integration, at shadow work, at psychological completion. They are the psyche's way of bringing to the surface what must be healed. The problem, of course, is that this is not how healing actually works. You cannot heal your wounds through another person's love. You cannot integrate your shadow by having someone else carry it for you. You cannot resolve your past by repeating it with different actors. But the unconscious does not know this. The unconscious operates on a different logic, a logic of symbols and repetition, of wound and return. And so the pattern continues, drawing us again and again toward those who embody our unfinished business, until we finally become conscious enough to recognize what we are doing and choose differently. Now let us go even deeper. Let us leave the realm of psychology and enter the territory of the brain itself, where the pattern is not just emotional, but literally neural, carved into the very structure of your nervous system. Modern neuroscience has revealed something extraordinary. Our early experiences don't just influence our psychology. They shape the physical architecture of our brains. This is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form and reorganize synaptic connections based on experience. In childhood, when the brain is most plastic, repeated experiences create neural pathways that become default routes for future processing. If you experienced chronic stress in childhood, from neglect, criticism, unpredictability, or abuse, your brain developed along a particular pathway. Your amygdala, the fear center, became hyperactive. Your hippocampus, which regulates stress hormones, became smaller. Your prefrontal cortex, which governs rational decision-making, showed reduced connectivity. Your nervous system learned to live in a state of threat, always anticipating danger, always on guard. This is not metaphorical, this is biological. Your brain physically adapted to an environment of emotional scarcity or danger, and those adaptations persist into adulthood, creating what psychologists call a negativity bias, a tendency to notice threats more than safety, problems more than solutions, pain more than pleasure. Here is what this means for attraction. When you meet someone who is emotionally available, consistent, and safe, your nervous system might not recognize them as a suitable partner. They don't activate your survival mechanisms. They don't trigger your hypervigilance. They don't make your threat detection system light up. And so, paradoxically, they might feel boring, unexciting, or, and this is the crucial word, wrong. But when you meet someone who is inconsistent, unpredictable, emotionally withholding, your nervous system recognizes them immediately. All your old survival mechanisms activate. Your hypervigilance has a purpose again. Your anxiety finds a familiar target. And your brain, in its confused wisdom, interprets this activation as attraction, as chemistry, as love. This is the neuroscience of trauma bonding. The intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable mixture of pleasure and pain, warmth and coldness, connection and rejection, creates one of the most powerful forms of conditioning known to psychology. It keeps you hooked in a way that consistent kindness never could. The brain releases dopamine, the pleasure and motivation chemical, not in response to predictable rewards, but in response to unpredictable ones. When you don't know whether your partner will be warm or cold tonight, your brain stays in a state of heightened anticipation. When they are occasionally kind after being distant, the dopamine hit is intense, creating an addictive cycle of longing and temporary satisfaction. This is why leaving a toxic relationship can feel like withdrawal from a drug, because neurologically, it is. Your brain has been conditioned to crave the pattern, to seek the familiar cocktail of anxiety and relief, longing and occasional fulfillment. Stable love does not produce the same neurochemical intensity, and so the adapted brain interprets it as less real, less compelling, less like love. But here is the hope hidden within the neuroscience. If the brain can be shaped by negative experiences, it can also be reshaped by positive ones. Neuroplasticity works in both directions. The pathways created in childhood are not permanent destinies. They are well-worn roads. Yes, difficult to leave. Yes, but not impossible. With awareness, with conscious choice, with different experiences repeated over time, new neural pathways can form. The brain can learn a new language of love. This is the promise that lies at the heart of our descent into shadow. You are not doomed. You are conditioned. And what has been conditioned can be reconditioned. What has been learned can be unlearned. What has been wired can be rewired. But first, you must see the pattern clearly. You must understand not just intellectually, but viscerally why you have been drawn to what hurts you. You must trace the pattern back to its origins and recognize it not as a character flaw, but as an adaptation, a survival strategy that once served you, but now imprisons you. We have laid the groundwork. We have traced the pattern to its origins in attachment, in shadow, in neuroscience. We understand intellectually why we repeat the past, why we choose familiar pain over unfamiliar peace, why we build homes in hearts that can only offer us homelessness. But understanding intellectually is not enough. To truly break the pattern, we must descend deeper still. We must enter the darkness of the repetition itself, must feel the full weight of what we are doing to ourselves, must confront the ways we participate in our own suffering. We must meet the parts of ourselves that cling to the pattern even as it destroys us. This is where the journey becomes difficult. This is where we move from theory into lived experience, from explanation into embodiment. This is the descent into shadow, where all transformations begin. Are you ready? There is a woman we will call Sarah. She is 34 years old, successful, intelligent, self-aware enough to know she has a pattern, but unable, despite years of therapy, to break it. She has been in 4 significant relationships in her adult life, and each one has followed the same arc: intense beginning, slow erosion, painful ending. Each partner has been, in their own way, emotionally unavailable, and each time she has told herself, "This is the last time. Next time, I'll choose differently." But she never does. The last relationship ended 6 months ago. Marcus was an artist. Brilliant, troubled, charismatic, impossible to reach. For 2 years, Sarah loved him with an intensity that frightened her. She rearranged her life around his moods, his schedule, his needs. When he was present, she felt alive in a way nothing else made her feel. When he withdrew, which was often, she felt hollow, desperate, willing to do anything to bring him back. Her friends stopped voicing their concerns after a while. They had said it all before, with the previous partners. "He's using you. You deserve better. This isn't healthy." Sarah knew they were right, but knowing changed nothing. On the surface, Sarah's pattern makes no sense. She is not lacking in options. She is attractive, accomplished, kind. Men who are stable, available, genuinely interested in her have pursued her. She has even dated some of them. But those relationships always felt flat to her, lacking some essential quality she couldn't name. The good men were too easy. They didn't make her feel the way Marcus made her feel. That desperate, consuming, significant feeling. "I know it sounds crazy," she told her therapist, "but being with someone who's actually nice feels like being fed nutrition paste. It's probably good for me, but it doesn't satisfy. With Marcus, even when it was terrible, at least I felt something. At least I felt alive." What Sarah doesn't fully understand yet is that she is not actually in a relationship with Marcus. She is in a relationship with her father. Not literally, of course. Marcus and her father are very different men, but the emotional dynamics are identical. Her father was a surgeon, brilliant, demanding, physically present but emotionally absent. As a child, Sarah learned to read his moods like a weather system, to adjust herself to maximize the rare moments when he would notice her, praise her, see her. She learned that love meant vigilance, performance, earning. She learned that the highest praise was when he briefly stopped criticizing. More than that, she learned something devastating. She learned that she was never quite enough. No matter how well she performed, how perfectly she behaved, there was always some way she fell short of his standards. And so she internalized a belief that became the foundation of her identity. I am fundamentally insufficient. I am worthy of love only insofar as I prove my worth through achievement and perfection. And even then, I might not be worthy. When Sarah met Marcus, her unconscious mind recognized him immediately, not as her father, but as an opportunity to finally solve the original problem, to finally prove, once and for all, that she was enough. If she could just make Marcus commit, if she could just transform his ambivalence into devotion, she would retroactively heal the wound her father inflicted. She would prove that she was lovable after all. This is the true nature of the repetition compulsion. It is not mere habit. It is not simple conditioning. It is an unconscious strategy for healing that operates on faulty logic. If I can just make this unavailable person choose me, I will heal the original abandonment. If I can just earn this critical person's approval, I will erase the original rejection. If I can just control this chaotic person, I will master the chaos of my childhood. But here is the tragic truth. You cannot heal the past by repeating it. You cannot solve the original equation by running the same variables through it again. The unavailable person will not suddenly become available just because you try hard enough. The critical person will not suddenly become accepting just because you perfect yourself. The chaotic person will not suddenly become stable just because you manage them skillfully enough. And even if they did, even if, by some miracle, you succeeded in transforming them, It would not heal the original wound, because the original wound was not created by Marcus or any adult partner. It was created in childhood by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally but couldn't or didn't. And that wound can only be healed by you, from the inside, through the difficult work of self-compassion, self-acceptance, and conscious choice. But the unconscious does not know this. The unconscious is trapped in the past, always trying to complete what was left incomplete, always reaching for the parent through the proxy of the partner. And so the pattern continues. Let us look more closely at how this pattern operates in real time, at the specific mechanisms that keep us trapped in relationships that harm us. The mechanism of idealization and devaluation. In the beginning, Sarah idealized Marcus. She saw him as special, unique, possessing qualities no one else had. This is not unusual. Most relationships begin with some degree of idealization, but for those with attachment wounds, the idealization serves a specific function. It justifies the pursuit. If Marcus is truly extraordinary, then the difficulty of winning his love makes sense. If he is rare and precious, then her suffering in pursuit of him is meaningful rather than masochistic. The idealization also serves another purpose. It protects against vulnerability. If Sarah is chasing someone extraordinary, she doesn't have to confront her terror of genuine intimacy with an ordinary, available person. The pursuit itself becomes a defense mechanism, a way to feel like she's seeking connection, while actually avoiding the vulnerability that real connection requires. But idealization always collapses under the weight of reality. Marcus is not a god. He is a flawed human being with his own wounds, his own inability to show up consistently, and when the idealization cracks, it often swings to its opposite, devaluation. Suddenly, Sarah sees all his flaws with crystal clarity. He's not special, he's just damaged. He's not mysterious, he's just avoidant. He's not worth her devotion. This swing between idealization and devaluation is characteristic of unstable attachment patterns. It prevents the development of genuine, complex, integrated perception, the ability to see another person as both flawed and worthy, both ordinary and valuable, both human and lovable. Instead, the person oscillates between extremes, perfect or worthless, savior or villain, everything or nothing. The mechanism of intermittent reinforcement. We have touched on this already, but it bears repeating. The single most powerful form of conditioning is intermittent reinforcement. Predictable rewards create moderate attachment. No rewards create abandonment of the behavior. But unpredictable rewards, sometimes yes, sometimes no, never quite knowing what you'll get, create intense, compulsive attachment. This is why gambling is addictive. This is why trauma bonds are so difficult to break. When Marcus was occasionally warm after being cold, occasionally present after being absent, occasionally attentive after being dismissive, Sarah's brain interpreted these moments as incredibly valuable precisely because they were unpredictable. Every time he showed up after a period of withdrawal, her nervous system flooded with relief and dopamine, reinforcing the cycle. If Marcus had been consistently kind, the kindness would have become baseline, expected, less intensely felt. If he had been consistently absent, Sarah would have eventually given up. But the unpredictability kept her hooked, always hoping that the next interaction would be one of the good ones, always believing that if she could just figure out the right approach, she could make the good moments more frequent. This is not love. This is conditioning. But it feels like love because it activates the same neural pathways that were forged in childhood, when love was conditional, unpredictable, something to be earned rather than freely given. The mechanism of cognitive dissonance. Sarah experienced something psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously. On one hand, she knew intellectually that the relationship was unhealthy. Her therapist told her, her friends told her. Some part of herself knew, but on the other hand, she had invested enormous emotional energy, time, and hope into the relationship. She had told herself a story about Marcus, about them, about what they could become together. To admit the relationship was doomed would mean admitting she had been wrong, had wasted 2 years, had chosen poorly. This is psychologically painful, so the mind does something remarkable. It adjusts the beliefs to reduce the dissonance. Sarah found herself creating narratives that justified staying. He's been through so much. He just needs time. The problem is external circumstances, not the relationship itself. We have something special that other people wouldn't understand. These narratives allowed her to continue in the relationship without facing the cognitive dissonance of knowing she should leave. They were not conscious lies. They were unconscious defense mechanisms, ways the psyche protected itself from painful truths. The mechanism of reenactment as attempted mastery. But perhaps the deepest mechanism is this. Sarah was not just repeating her past. She was trying to master it. Every time she pursued Marcus, every time she tried to understand him, accommodate him, win him over, she was unconsciously attempting to do what she could not do as a child, make the unavailable parent available, earn the love that should have been unconditional, control an uncontrollable situation. Freud observed that children who experience trauma often replay it in their play, returning to the frightening event again and again. He theorized that this repetition serves a function. It transforms passive experience into active mastery. The child who was helpless in the original trauma takes control of the narrative in the replay, attempting to create a different outcome, to assert agency where there was none. This is what Sarah was doing with Marcus. She was replaying her childhood dynamic with her father, but this time she was the adult. This time she had agency, skills, awareness. This time she believed she could succeed where child Sarah had failed. She could finally make the unavailable man see her, choose her, love her. And in doing so, she would retroactively heal the original wound. But the flaw in this logic is profound. Marcus is not her father. The past cannot be changed by altering the present. And the child inside Sarah, who still longs for her father's approval, will never be satisfied by Marcus's attention, because what she truly needs is not Marcus's love, but her own compassionate witnessing of her childhood pain, her own acceptance of the truth that her father's limitations were not her fault, were not evidence of her unworthiness. This is the heart of the conflict. This is the battle that rages in the unconscious of anyone trapped in a pattern of choosing people who hurt them. It is a battle between the wounded child who believes the past can be fixed and the emerging adult who knows it cannot, between the compulsion to repeat and the desire to be free, between the familiar pain and the terrifying unknown of genuine healing. Let me tell you what happened to Sarah in those final months with Marcus. The relationship was clearly dying. He had become increasingly distant, cancelling plans, responding to her messages with less frequency. Sarah felt herself becoming someone she didn't recognize, anxious, obsessive, constantly checking her phone, analyzing every interaction for signs of his withdrawal or return. One night, after Marcus cancelled their plans for the third time that month, Sarah found herself sitting on her apartment floor, sobbing with a desperation that frightened her. And in that moment, something shifted. In that moment, she heard herself saying, "Please don't leave me." And suddenly, she was not 34 anymore. She was 7. She was 7 years old, standing in the doorway of her father's study, having brought him a drawing she'd made at school. He glanced at it briefly, said, "That's nice, Sarah," and returned to his work. She stood there for a moment, hoping he would look up again, would ask her about it, would see the hours of effort she'd put into making something that might please him. But he didn't look up, and eventually she returned to her room, the drawing crumpled in her hand, understanding in some wordless way that she was not important enough to merit his full attention. Sitting on her apartment floor, adult Sarah met child Sarah for the first time in decades. She saw the little girl who had learned that love meant longing, that connection meant effort, that worthiness had to be earned. She saw how much pain that child was carrying, how much she had been trying, all these years, to make her father turn around and really see her. And Marcus was never going to do that. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't, but because he couldn't give what he didn't have. His emotional unavailability was not a challenge to be overcome or a test to be passed. It was simply his reality, shaped by his own childhood wounds, his own limitations. Sarah had been trying to solve the wrong problem. She had been trying to make Marcus become someone he wasn't, when what she really needed to do was tend to the child inside herself who had been waiting 3 decades for her father to become someone he couldn't be. This is the moment of descent, the moment when the pattern becomes conscious. This is when the shadow reveals itself not as an external enemy, but as an internal wound, when the compulsion to repeat finally confronts the possibility of change. The Greek concept of anagnorisis, the moment of recognition in tragedy when the protagonist sees the truth, is what Sarah experienced that night. All great stories contain this moment. Oedipus realizing his true identity, Hamlet understanding the depths of corruption, Macbeth confronting the consequences of his ambition. It is the moment when illusion drops away and reality stands naked and undeniable. In psychological terms, it is the moment when the unconscious content becomes conscious, when the shadow emerges into light, when the pattern that has been invisible becomes visible. It is simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means confronting how much time has been lost, how much pain has been self-inflicted, how much power we have given to our wounds. Liberating because consciousness is the prerequisite for choice, and choice is the prerequisite for change. But here is what you must understand. This moment of recognition is not the end of the pattern. It is the beginning of the real work. Seeing the pattern is not the same as breaking it. Understanding why you are drawn to people who hurt you does not immediately free you from the attraction. The neural pathways remain. The childhood conditioning persists. The shadow still pulls. What happens next is where the true test lies. What happens when, despite your new understanding, you feel the pull of the familiar pattern again? What happens when you meet someone new who activates all the old feelings, who makes stable kindness seem boring by comparison, who triggers every wound you now know you carry? This is the battle that Sarah faced in the months after her revelation. This is the battle that everyone faces who descends into their shadow and emerges with uncomfortable knowledge. The pattern does not vanish simply because you've seen it. In many ways, the pattern becomes more difficult to endure precisely because you can no longer justify it to yourself. You can no longer tell yourself comforting stories. You must watch yourself be drawn to the familiar pain while knowing what you are doing and why. This is the agony of consciousness. This is the price of self-awareness. You lose the innocence of unconscious behavior. You can no longer harm yourself without watching yourself do it. And this creates a new kind of suffering, not the suffering of unconscious repetition, but the suffering of conscious internal division, of wanting two things simultaneously, of being pulled between the past and the future. Let me tell you about another person. We'll call him David. David's pattern was different in its particulars, but identical in its essence. He was drawn to women who were chaotic, unstable, dramatic. His longest relationship was with a woman named Alexandra, who struggled with mental illness and addiction. The relationship was marked by crises, suicide threats, disappearances, betrayals, reconciliations. David's friends couldn't understand why he stayed. "She's destroying you," they'd say. And it was true. David was exhausted, depleted, constantly in survival mode. But he couldn't leave. Every time he tried, Alexandra would spiral, and David would feel that he was the only thing standing between her and catastrophe. What David didn't realize was that he was not staying out of love. He was staying out of a psychological need that had nothing to do with Alexandra. As a child, David's mother had been depressed, often non-functional. David learned early that his role in the family was to be the caretaker, the responsible one, the one who kept everything from falling apart. His identity became fused with this role. He felt valuable only when he was needed, important only when there was a crisis to manage. Alexandra's chaos gave David a sense of purpose. In caring for her, managing her crises, preventing her self-destruction, he felt significant. He felt like he mattered. The relationship, as dysfunctional as it was, gave him what his childhood had taught him to need, a sense of indispensability, a role as savior, a justification for his existence. But this was not love. This was codependency, a term that describes relationships where one person's need to be needed entangles with another person's need to be taken care of, creating a toxic symbiosis that serves both parties' psychological wounds while preventing both from healing. The pattern of being drawn to people who hurt us takes many forms. For some, like Sarah, it looks like pursuing the emotionally unavailable. For others, like David, it looks like caretaking the unstable. For others still, it might look like accepting abuse in exchange for intermittent affection or sabotaging healthy relationships because they don't feel real, or seeking partners who are critical because without criticism, they don't know how to measure their worth. But beneath all these variations lies the same mechanism, the unconscious attempt to resolve childhood wounds through adult relationships, the confusion of familiar pain with love, the belief that if we can just make this relationship work, we will heal something in ourselves that can only actually be healed through internal work. This is the darkness of Act 2. This is the full confrontation with the pattern, with all its pain and persistence, with the way it operates below consciousness and continues even after consciousness begins to dawn. This is where many people get stuck, aware of their pattern but unable to break it, understanding the why but not finding the how. But there is a way forward. There is a path from pattern to freedom, from compulsion to choice, from unconscious repetition to conscious creation. That path requires descent before ascent, darkness before light, shadow before integration. And that is where we must go next, into the awakening, into the revelation that transforms understanding into action, knowledge into liberation. But before we ascend, we must sit for a moment longer in the depth of the conflict. We must feel the full weight of what we have discovered. We must honor the pain of it, the years lost to it, the relationships damaged by it. We must acknowledge that this pattern, while understandable, has cost us dearly, has cost us genuine intimacy, self-respect, years of our lives spent in pursuit of people who could never give us what we needed. The recognition of the pattern is often accompanied by grief, grief for the child who needed to develop these strategies to survive, grief for the adult who has unconsciously continued them long past their usefulness, grief for the relationships that might have been if only we had been able to choose differently, grief for the time we cannot reclaim. This grief is necessary. It is part of the alchemical process of transformation. You cannot skip over it, bypass it, transcend it too quickly. The shadow must be met fully before it can be integrated. The pattern must be felt deeply before it can be released. So if you recognize yourself in these stories, if you feel the weight of your own pattern pressing against your chest, breathe. Breathe and know that you are not alone in this. Millions of humans carry these patterns, learned in childhood, repeated in adulthood, unconsciously seeking in others what can only be found in themselves. You are not broken, you are wounded. And wounds, unlike brokenness, can heal. There is a morning that arrives differently than other mornings. The light feels changed, as if something in the atmosphere has shifted overnight. You wake and the first thought in your mind is not anxiety or longing or the familiar weight of an unhealed wound. The first thought is something quieter, something newer. I can choose differently. Not, I should choose differently. That thought you've had 1,000 times, laden with shame and self-criticism. Not, I need to choose differently. That desperate imperative born of pain, but lacking direction. But simply, I can. The possibility opens like a door you didn't know was there, and beyond it is not certainty, but something more valuable, agency. This is the beginning of the awakening, not a single moment, but a gradual emergence, like a diver ascending slowly from great depths, pausing at intervals to let the pressure equalize, to let the body adjust to the changing environment. You cannot rush this process. You cannot force yourself into health any more than you could force yourself into the pattern. Both require time, require patience, require a kind of gentle persistence. Let us return to Sarah. In the months after her moment of recognition on her apartment floor, she did not suddenly become healed. The pattern did not vanish. The pull toward emotionally unavailable men did not cease. But something had shifted in her relationship to the pattern. She could see it now. She could watch it happening in real time. 3 months after ending things with Marcus, Sarah met someone at a friend's party. His name was Julian. He was attractive, charming, and within the first hour of conversation, Sarah's body was sending her signals. Excitement, anxiety, that familiar cocktail of attraction and unease. And then Julian mentioned in passing that he was not really looking for anything serious right now, just seeing where things go. In the past, Sarah would have heard this as a challenge. She would have interpreted it as, "I'm not looking for anything serious, with just anyone. But you could be the exception." She would have felt that old hunger rise up, that drive to prove her worthiness, to be the one who changed his mind. But this time, something different happened. This time, adult Sarah heard the words clearly. This man is not available. And more importantly, she recognized the feeling in her body, that spike of interest precisely because of his unavailability. She recognized the pattern activating. In that moment, Sarah had a choice that she'd never truly had before. Not because the choice didn't exist, it always existed, but because she hadn't been conscious enough to recognize it as a choice. Now she could see. One path led toward the familiar. Pursue Julian. Try to win him over. Enter the dynamic she'd spent decades repeating. The other path led toward the unknown. Walk away. Disappoint the part of herself that wanted the challenge. Choose consciousness over compulsion. She didn't walk away immediately. She dated Julian for a few weeks, but throughout, she watched herself. She noticed when she was performing for his approval. She noticed when she was strategizing ways to make him commit. She noticed when she was abandoning her own needs to accommodate his ambivalence. And each time she noticed, she made a small choice to pull back, to center herself, to refuse to participate in the dance her unconscious wanted to perform. Eventually, she ended it. Not dramatically, not with anger or blame, but with a simple, clear acknowledgement. This dynamic doesn't serve me anymore. I'm looking for something different. And Julian, who it turned out was playing out his own patterns, was surprised, but accepting. He wasn't a villain. He was just another wounded person, unconsciously seeking what felt familiar to him. This is what awakening looks like in practice. Not a sudden enlightenment, not a permanent transcendence of old patterns, but a gradual increase in consciousness, in the space between stimulus and response, in the ability to observe rather than only experience, to choose rather than only react. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who developed logotherapy, wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The work of breaking the pattern is the work of expanding that space, of creating enough distance between the impulse and the action that choice becomes possible, of developing what Buddhism calls mindfulness, or what Western psychology calls metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking, to observe your own mental processes, to be aware that you are aware. The practice of recognition. The first step in this awakening is simple but not easy. Learn to recognize your pattern in real time. This requires developing an internal observer, a part of yourself that can watch your own behavior with curiosity rather than judgment. When you feel that familiar pull of attraction, pause. Notice what you're feeling. Is it genuine attraction to this person's qualities? Or is it the activation of an old pattern? Are you drawn to who they are, or to who you hope you can make them become? Are you seeking connection, Or are you seeking to solve an old equation? Learn to recognize the physical sensations that accompany the pattern. For many people, unhealthy attraction feels like anxiety, a flutter in the stomach, a tightness in the chest, an obsessive quality to the thoughts. Healthy attraction, by contrast, often feels calmer, warm rather than hot, steady rather than frantic, expansive rather than contracting. Learn to recognize the narratives you tell yourself to justify pursuing what you know is harmful. They're just going through a hard time right now. I'm being too demanding. This is just how real passion feels. These stories are not truths. They are defenses, ways the psyche protects itself from the pain of seeing clearly. The practice of grief and compassion. As you begin to recognize your pattern, you will inevitably encounter difficult emotions. Shame. Why have I wasted so much time on this? What's wrong with me? Anger. How could I have let this happen? How could they have treated me this way? Grief. So many years lost, so many relationships damaged, so much pain that could have been avoided. These emotions are natural and necessary, but they must be met with compassion, not with additional self-criticism. Remember, you developed this pattern as an adaptation to impossible circumstances. Child, you did the best they could with what they knew. Adult you is doing the best you can with the consciousness you have. The practice here is to turn toward yourself with the kindness you would offer a beloved friend, to recognize that you are not your pattern. You are the awareness that can see the pattern. You are not the wound. You are the consciousness that can witness the wound and choose whether to act from it. Carl Rogers, the founder of humanistic psychology, emphasized the importance of unconditional positive regard, accepting and respecting yourself without conditions, without having to earn your own approval. For many people trapped in patterns of seeking approval from others, learning to offer this unconditional positive regard to themselves is revolutionary. The practice of reparenting. Much of the work of breaking these patterns involves what therapists call reparenting, learning to give yourself what you didn't receive in childhood. This is not about blaming your parents. Most parents do the best they can with their own unhealed wounds. This is about recognizing that certain emotional needs went unmet, and that you, as an adult, can begin to meet them yourself. If you didn't receive consistent emotional attunement, you can learn to attune to yourself, to notice your own emotional states, to validate your own feelings, to trust your own perceptions. If you didn't receive unconditional acceptance, you can practice self-acceptance, recognizing that your worth is inherent, not earned, that you are lovable not because of what you achieve, but because of what you are. If you didn't receive safety and stability, you can create safety and stability for yourself, through routine, through boundaries, through choosing relationships that feel steady rather than chaotic. This is not narcissism. This is not self-indulgence. This is basic psychological hygiene, the foundation of healthy adult functioning. You cannot have genuinely healthy relationships with others until you have a basically healthy relationship with yourself. You cannot choose people who treat you well until you believe you deserve to be treated well. You cannot recognize love until you can love yourself. The integration of the shadow. But reparenting, while necessary, is not sufficient. To truly break the pattern, you must also do the work that Jung called shadow integration, bringing the rejected parts of yourself back into consciousness and learning to embrace them. Remember, much of your attraction to people who hurt you is driven by projection, seeing in them the qualities you've rejected in yourself. The critical partner embodies your own self-criticism. The unavailable partner mirrors your own unavailability to yourself. The chaotic partner reflects your own disowned chaos. The practice of shadow integration involves, first, identifying what qualities you are most critical of in others. What judgments do you make? What traits immediately turn you off or frighten you? These are often hints of your shadow. Second, asking honestly whether these qualities exist in yourself in some form. Not in the same way, perhaps, but in some version. The quality you despise in others is often the quality you've exiled in yourself. Third, finding a way to accept and integrate these qualities, not to celebrate them if they're genuinely harmful, but to acknowledge them, to understand why they exist, to stop fighting against them so violently. For Sarah, this meant recognizing that her harsh judgment of Marcus's emotional unavailability was partly a projection of her own unavailability, not to others, but to herself. She was unavailable to her own emotions, her own needs, her own vulnerability. She presented a polished, together exterior, while being profoundly disconnected from her internal experience. Marcus simply made visible what was hidden in her. As Sarah began to cultivate a relationship with her own emotions, to allow herself to be vulnerable, to stop performing constant competence, something shifted. The pull toward emotionally unavailable men didn't vanish, but it weakened. She began to feel more whole in herself, less desperate for external validation. And from that place of greater wholeness, she could begin to choose differently. The neuroscience of rewiring. Remember, the pattern exists not just psychologically, but neurologically. Your brain has been shaped by years of repetition, creating strong neural pathways that make the old pattern feel like the default, the comfortable, the inevitable. But neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, means you can create new pathways. This requires consistent practice, not just occasional effort. Every time you make a conscious choice that goes against the old pattern, you strengthen the new pathway. Every time you choose stable kindness over dramatic intensity, every time you walk away from someone who activates your wounds rather than pursuing them, every time you offer yourself compassion instead of criticism, you are reshaping your brain. At first, this new pathway is weak. It feels unnatural, effortful, wrong. The old pathway is like a well-worn road. The new pathway is like a footpath through tall grass. But with repetition, the footpath becomes a trail, the trail becomes a road, and eventually, the new pattern can become as automatic as the old one once was. This takes time. Neuroscientists estimate that forming a new habit, which is what we're talking about here, though calling it merely a habit trivializes the depth, takes anywhere from a few months to over a year, depending on the complexity of the behavior and the strength of the old pattern. This is why immediate transformation is not realistic. This is why you will slip, will feel the pull of the old pattern, will sometimes choose it even knowing better. But each slip is also an opportunity to notice, to forgive yourself, to choose differently next time. Healing is not linear, it's spiral. You return to the same issues again and again, but each time at a slightly higher level of consciousness with slightly more capacity to choose differently. The possibility of secure attachment. Here is something you may not believe yet, but need to hear. Secure attachment is possible, even if you didn't experience it in childhood, even if every adult relationship has been insecure, even if the pattern has been repeated for decades. You can still develop earned secure attachment. Research by psychologists like Mary Main has shown that attachment styles are not destiny. Through therapy, through conscious relational practice, through corrective emotional experiences with trustworthy people, insecure attachment patterns can shift toward security. What does this look like? It looks like gradually becoming able to trust that someone can be both reliable and genuinely caring, not performing or manipulating. It looks like learning that conflict doesn't mean catastrophe, that disagreement doesn't equal abandonment. It looks like developing the capacity to be vulnerable without terror, to ask for what you need without shame, to receive love without immediate suspicion about when it will be withdrawn. For Sarah, this process began not with romantic relationships, but with friendships. She began to notice which friends felt genuinely safe, consistently supportive, capable of being present without drama or demand. She practiced letting them see her more fully, sharing not just her successes but her struggles, not just her strength but her vulnerability. At first, this felt excruciating. Her nervous system interpreted vulnerability as danger. But these friends responded with care, with acceptance, with continued presence. And slowly, through repeated experiences of being vulnerable and not being rejected, Sarah's nervous system began to learn a new pattern. Connection can be safe. People can be trustworthy. I can be loved for who I am, not just for what I achieve. This is the corrective emotional experience that begins to heal attachment wounds, not a single dramatic healing, but thousands of small moments where the new reality contradicts the old expectation, where care is offered and remains consistent, where vulnerability is met with compassion rather than criticism. The transformation of identity. As the old pattern begins to loosen its grip, something profound happens. Your identity begins to shift. You realize that you are not your wounds. You are not your history. You are not the strategies you develop to survive. The Buddhists call this non-self or anatta, the recognition that what we think of as our fixed self is actually a collection of changing patterns, habits, and identifications, none of which are permanently, ultimately us. This is not nihilistic. It's liberating. It means you are not stuck. You are not doomed to repeat the past forever. You are more spacious, more fluid, more capable of change than you believed. The psychologist Carl Rogers wrote about the fully functioning person, someone who is open to experience, trusts their own organism, is creative and adaptable, lives existentially in the present moment. This is what becomes possible when you are no longer imprisoned by past patterns, no longer compulsively repeating old strategies, no longer choosing from unconscious wound, but from conscious presence. But this transformation is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, the self that was there before the wounds, beneath the patterns, waiting all this time to be seen and known. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, integrating all the scattered parts of yourself into a coherent whole. The pattern of being drawn to people who hurt you was never truly about those people. It was always about you, about the parts of yourself you were trying to heal, to find, to complete. Those people were mirrors, teachers, challenges. And now, having seen what they reflected, having learned what they taught, you can release them. You can stop seeking yourself in others and finally find yourself in yourself. Let me tell you the end of Sarah's story, or at least where she was last time I knew of her. 2 years after the relationship with Marcus ended, Sarah was dating someone new. His name was Thomas. He was steady, present, emotionally available. In the beginning, Sarah felt almost nothing. No fireworks, no obsession, no consuming intensity. "I don't know if I'm attracted to him," she told her therapist. "It feels too easy." Her therapist smiled. Maybe that's how healthy attraction feels to someone whose nervous system was trained on difficulty. Sarah stayed with it, more out of commitment to her own healing than out of intense desire. And gradually something remarkable happened. She began to feel a different kind of attraction. Not the frantic, desperate pull she'd always associated with love, but something warmer, more stable, more sustainable. She began to appreciate Thomas's consistency, his emotional maturity, his capacity to show up. There were moments when she missed the intensity of her old patterns. There were moments when she felt tempted by someone who activated all her old wounds. But each time, she recognized what was happening. She saw the pattern trying to reassert itself, and she chose differently. The relationship with Thomas wasn't perfect. No relationship is. But it was fundamentally different from all her previous relationships. It was built on mutual respect rather than mutual wound. It was characterized by collaboration rather than competition. It felt like partnership rather than pursuit. And most importantly, Sarah felt like herself in the relationship. She didn't have to perform, didn't have to earn her place, didn't have to prove her worthiness. She could simply be flawed, human, whole. And that, more than anything, was what finally convinced her that she had broken the pattern. not because she never felt its pull, but because she no longer had to obey it. This is the promise of the awakening, not perfection, not the complete transcendence of old patterns, but the expansion of consciousness, the increase of choice, the gradual shift from compulsion to agency. The pattern may always live in you in some form. Those neural pathways, once formed, never fully disappear, but they can become less dominant. They can become options rather than inevitabilities. You can learn to recognize when you're being pulled by history rather than guided by presence. You can learn to pause, to breathe, to choose from consciousness rather than from wound. You can learn to seek not what feels familiar, but what genuinely serves your growth. And in doing so, you participate in something larger than personal healing. You participate in the evolution of consciousness itself, in humanity's gradual movement from unconscious repetition to conscious creation, from being victims of our history to being authors of our future. The descent into shadow is complete. We have traced the pattern to its origins. We have felt its power and understood its mechanism. We have sat with the grief and the difficulty of seeing clearly. And now we have glimpsed the possibility of transformation, not as a distant ideal, but as a lived reality, difficult and gradual and absolutely possible. What remains is to integrate this understanding, to place it in context, to understand what it means not just for individual healing, but for the collective human journey, for the future of consciousness, for the mysterious evolution towards something we can barely glimpse but already sense, a humanity more conscious, more compassionate, more free. Let us ascend from the depths of shadow into the light of integration, carrying with us everything we have learned, transformed by the journey, ready to live differently. There is a version of you that does not yet exist, a you that lives a year from now, 5 years from now, a decade from now. This future self looks back at you with compassion, with gratitude, with a kind of tender recognition of what you were going through, what you were learning, what you were becoming. This future self has broken the pattern, not perfectly. They still feel its echo sometimes, still recognize its pull, but they no longer obey it. They choose differently. They love differently. They live from consciousness rather than from wound, and this future self exists right now as a possibility within you. Every choice you make either brings you closer to them or keeps you trapped in the past. Every moment of awareness, every act of self-compassion, every time you recognize the pattern and choose differently, these are the steps toward becoming that future self. We have traveled together through the depths of one of humanity's most painful paradoxes, why we are drawn to people who hurt us. We have seen how this pattern originates in childhood, how it operates through attachment and shadow, how it becomes encoded in our neural pathways and repeated in our adult relationships. We have witnessed the suffering it creates, the years lost, the potential squandered, the love rejected because it didn't match the familiar template of pain. But we have also seen the path of liberation. We have seen that the pattern, while powerful, is not permanent. We have seen that consciousness creates choice, and choice creates freedom. We have seen that you are not doomed to repeat your history forever, that earned, secure attachment is possible, that the future can be different from the past. The ancient Greeks had a concept called anamnesis, the idea that learning is really a form of remembering, of recalling truths that we always knew but had forgotten. In a sense, that is what this journey has been about. Not learning something new, but remembering something old. Remembering who you were before the wounds, before the patterns, before you learned to confuse pain with love. That child who needed unconditional love and didn't receive it. They're still in you, still hoping, still reaching. The work is not to abandon them, but to finally give them what they needed. Not from some unavailable external other, but from you. To become for yourself the parent you needed, the partner you deserved, the friend who sees you fully. This is the deepest form of self-love. not narcissism, not indulgence, but simply meeting your own needs with the same care and consistency you would offer someone you cherished. It is revolutionary, because most of us were never taught that we deserved this, that we could provide this for ourselves, that we were worthy of our own kindness. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This requires descending into the shadow, confronting what we've been avoiding, integrating what we've rejected. It requires seeing the patterns that have imprisoned us and choosing, courageously and consistently, to break them. You are not your wounds, but your wounds have shaped you. You are not your patterns, but your patterns have taught you. You are not your history, but your history has brought you to this moment of possibility, of choice, of potential transformation. So here is what I want you to know. Here at the end of this long journey through shadow, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, you are not alone. Millions of humans carry these same wounds, repeat these same cycles, struggle with these same questions. Your pain is not unique, and that is actually comforting. It means you are part of something universal, something human, something that can be understood and therefore can be healed. If you have spent years, even decades, caught in relationships that hurt you, you have not wasted your time. You have been learning, even if you didn't know it. You have been gathering the raw material of transformation. Every failed relationship was a teacher. Every repeated pattern was trying to show you something about yourself. And now that you can see what it was trying to teach, you can finally learn the lesson and move forward. If you fear that you are broken, damaged beyond repair, doomed to repeat these patterns forever, that fear is understandable, but it is not true. You are wounded, yes, but wounds heal. Patterns can be broken, brains can be rewired, futures can be different from pasts. Change is difficult, yes. Change is gradual, yes. But change is absolutely, unquestionably possible. We stand at an extraordinary moment in human history. For the first time, we have the tools, psychological, neuroscientific, therapeutic, to understand our own consciousness with unprecedented clarity. We can see the mechanisms that have kept humanity trapped in cycles of repetition for millennia. We can trace the patterns back to their origins. We can understand, really understand, why we do what we do. And with that understanding comes the possibility of conscious evolution, not just personal healing, but collective transformation. As each person does this work, breaks these patterns, chooses consciousness over compulsion, we don't just heal ourselves, we heal the collective. We stop passing trauma to the next generation. We create new templates for what love can be, what relationships can be, what human consciousness can become. This is the future of consciousness. Not some mystical transcendence, but the gradual, difficult, beautiful work of making the unconscious conscious, bringing shadow into light, choosing awareness over automaticity. It is the evolution from being programmed by our past to authoring our own future. There is a moment in every hero's journey when the hero must die and be reborn. Not literally, but psychologically. They must release who they thought they were to become who they actually are. They must shed the old identity, the comfortable patterns, the familiar strategies, and step into unknown territory. You are at that moment now. The person who was drawn to people who hurt them. That person doesn't have to be who you are anymore. That was a stage in your development, a chapter in your story, but not the final chapter. You can close that chapter. You can begin writing a new one. It will not be easy. The old patterns will call to you, will feel safer than the unknown territory of new choices. Your nervous system will resist. The wounded child inside you will fear abandoning the old strategies that once helped them survive. There will be moments of doubt, of relapse, of wondering if you're capable of change. But you are. You absolutely are. Every choice matters. Every moment of consciousness counts. Every time you recognize the pattern and choose differently, you strengthen the new pathway. You become more fully yourself. You step closer to that future self who has already broken free. So here is my final message to you. Be patient with yourself. Be compassionate with yourself. The pattern developed over years or decades. It will not disappear overnight. Healing is not linear. You will have good days and difficult days. You will feel the pull of the old patterns even as you try to create new ones. But keep going. Keep choosing consciousness. Keep noticing when you're drawn to familiar pain and asking yourself, is this truly what I want? Or is this what I'm conditioned to want? Keep seeking relationships that feel genuinely nourishing rather than just familiar. Keep offering yourself the love you once sought from others. And remember, you are not working toward some distant perfection. You are working toward wholeness, the integration of all your parts, the acceptance of your full humanity, the freedom to choose from presence rather than from past. The people who hurt you were not your destiny. They were your teachers. And now that you've learned the lesson, you can thank them for showing you what needed healing and then release them. You can stop seeking yourself in others and finally find yourself in yourself. This is how the pattern breaks. Not through force, but through awareness. Not through perfection, but through practice. Not through transcendence, but through integration. The shadow has been descended into. The unconscious has been made conscious. The pattern has been seen for what it is. Not a curse, but a message. Not a destiny, but a teacher. And now you stand at the threshold of a different kind of life. A life where love doesn't equal pain, where intimacy doesn't equal danger, where you choose partners not because they feel familiar, but because they feel right, where you finally give yourself permission to be loved the way you always deserved, fully, consistently, without having to earn it, without having to prove your worth. That life is waiting for you. It has always been waiting for you. The only question is, will you choose it? Because here is the ultimate truth. You were never drawn to the people who hurt you. You were drawn to the hope that through them, you could finally heal yourself. Now you know. You don't need them for that. You never did. You have everything you need within you. The consciousness, the choice, the capacity to love yourself the way you always should have been loved. The descent is complete. The awakening has begun. And the future, your future, starts now. Remember, you are not your patterns. You are the consciousness that can witness them. You are not your wounds. You are the awareness that can heal them. You are not your past. You are the possibility of your future. Welcome to the rest of your life.